In this video, we're going to tie the Hot Lips Gurgler. And the Hot Lips Gurgler is a takeoff of Jack Gartside's Gurgler fly. And it differs from his original Gurgler by having this lower lip on it, which gives it a really aggressive popping action on retrieve. And it's a great fly. You can tie this fly down to size 14 or 16 for small bluegill, or tie it up into the 1/0, 2/0 hooks for huge predatory fish. So it's a great popper. You can tie it with various thicknesses of foam. We're going to tie this segmented version today that does not have a dub body because it's just simpler and quicker to tie, and I haven't found it any less effective. It floats really well and just catches fish. So let's tie the Hot Lips Gurgler. The hook I'm going to use is a Daiichi 1710. This is a 2x long nymph hook in size 8. Size 8 works really well for nice size bluegill and is large enough to even catch a largemouth bass on. So I get my hook in my tying vise. Let's get it nice and level here. And then for thread, I'm using UTC 140 denier. 140 denier really helps clamp down on that foam body that we're going to use. And I start my thread about a hook eye length behind the eye of the hook and wrap back to the bend of the hook. And with this hook, the bend is about where the barb is. So I'll just wrap back to just above the barb, then bring my thread back and let it hang at about the hook point. For flash in the tail, we're going to use Hareline's Krystal Flash. This is rainbow color. It's a really nice multicolored flash for the tail, and we don't use a lot. We take one strand and we'll fold that strand over in half, and then I'll fold it in half again and cut it. And that gives me 4 strands. And the way I like to tie this flash in, you can tie it in any way you like, but the way I like to tie the flash in is to wrap the strands in front of my thread and under the hook shank. And so I just in front of the thread and under the hook shank, and they don't have to be even at all because we're going to trim them. And I hold tension on my thread, and I make wraps over the Krystal Flash and tie it down on either side of the hook, and I wrap back to the barb, which was our rear tying point, and then bring my thread back to the hook point. And while I have it in my fingers, I want to go ahead and trim it. So I want it roughly the length of the shank of the hook, so I just come in and trim that. And now we have a nice flash tail. For the tail, we're going to use woolly booger marabou and sculpin olive. Any marabou will work for this, but I really like this woolly booger marabou because the fibers are a bit shorter and they're thicker, and they don't have those long stringy fibers off the end. And we want our tail to be about the same length as our flash, maybe just a touch longer. So that would be about there. And to make the tie-in a little less messy, I'm going to go ahead and trim the front of my marabou with my scissors and trim that excess marabou off and tie it in from the hook point and wrap back to our rearward point there at the barb. And we'll wrap some of those down. Some of those little fuzzies don't hurt at all, but we want to get most of them down. And let's take our thread back to our initial tying point behind the hook eye. Now the body on this fly is craft foam. This is simply Walmart, Hobby Lobby, 2mm craft foam, and it's about a little more than double the length of the hook shank, and it's trimmed to about a hook gap in width. And to make the lower lip on the fly, we're going to slip the foam over the hook eye. So I take my scissors and about 3/8 of an inch back from the end of the foam, I make a hole in the foam, and then I slip that hole over the eye of the hook, just like that. And then I'll take a couple of loose thread wraps and then begin tightening down. And it's going to spin on you. You notice how it spins there. And we've got a little piece of foam sticking up. Let's trim that off. And then we'll make a few tight thread wraps and let's straighten our foam back out. And that forms our lower lip of our fly. Now, we're not going to dub the body of this like many foam flies with a small number 8 or hook, smaller hook, not small, but smaller hook. It closes the hook gap down some, so we're going to make a segmented body. And I'm going to rotate my vise where you can see how I'm making the segments. I'm going to hold the foam on either side of the hook shank and make a spiral wrap, one spiral wrap about 1/8 of an inch back and create a little segment ball. And then I'll do it a second time. And these should be roughly the same size. It's not critical that they are the same size. And you see that middle one, the second one is about the middle of my hook shank. Now I'm going to tie my legs in here, and I like to have a little flat spot in the foam to tie my legs in. So I grab a little bit of that foam and create, a 1/16 of an inch flat spot in the middle. And then I come back and make a third segment. And then I want my last segment to be all the way back to the tie-in point of my tail. So I'll make sure that I make a nice big diagonal all the way back and get to that point. And like I say, my segments aren't quite exactly the same size, but they're close enough. So then I want to move my thread back to this point. If we were dubbing the body, we would make a dubbing noodle here, dub to the middle, tie our legs in, and dub forward. But we're not going to dub, so we're going to go over the top of a segment, a wrap over the top of the next segment, and leave our thread hanging right in the center of the fly. Now the legs I'm using here, certainly use any rubber leg you like. These are Spirit River yellow and black zebra legs. They make a nice contrast on this olive fly. And I take one length of these, which is about 8 inches, and I double it and cut it in half. And I lay one piece aside for my next fly because I'm only going to use 1/2 of that. I fold it over in half again to double it and cut it, and now I have my 2 leg pieces. Now, the way I like to tie legs on these flies is to just push the leg against the thread and let the weight of the bobbin just hold that thread against the body. Makes it very easy to tie in that leg. And there we go. And I do the same thing for the leg on the opposite side. Hold the leg against the thread and let go, and the thread holds it in place. And then I make a few tight wraps just to tighten it down. And now I have a nice X set of legs. So we pull our legs back, wrap forward over the next segment, wrap forward over the next segment, and then bring our thread back to our initial starting point, just behind the hook eye. And now to make the body of our fly, we pull the foam over the top, and notice how at the rear, my last segment ties the foam in right at the base of the tail. So I'll pull the legs back to get them out of the way. Make a couple of loose wraps and then begin tightening down. This is where that 140 nadir comes in handy, and make 4 or 5 thread wraps just to tighten that down. Now, if you pull the body too tight, it will push down on the legs and they'll point down. So if your legs are pointing down too much here, I think they're just fine. Not quite level, but I think they're fine. That means you've just pulled the body of the foam a little bit too tight, so just loosen it up. All right, let's trim this front. I don't want my lips quite as long as they are. I want them about a hook gap. About a hook gap's a good estimate. So I trim them off to that, and I like to trim the corners just a bit to round the corners. And there's that front lip of this fly. Now all that remains is a quick whip finish, and I'm going to just hand whip finish here. And cut off my excess. Now, these legs, they're a little bit long for my taste, so I'm going to trim them back a bit. If they're too long, they foul in the hook, the bend of the hook. So I'm going to cut these roughly the same length. And then it doesn't affect the fishing of the fly at all, but I like to come in with a Sharpie and make some spots on the back of the fly. And there we have it. A nice segmented body underneath. Quicker and simpler to tie than the dub body, and I don't think it's any less effective at all. There's the Hot Lips Gurgler. Give it a try. I think you'll like it because it really has a great popping motion on retrieve.